Welcome to Endometriosis Voices, listening to lived experiences, learning from science. In today's video, we are looking at a question many people with endometriosis hear at some point. Why don't you just get pregnant? It will cure it. If you are trying to conceive, recovering from loss, have decided not to have children, or cannot safely carry a pregnancy, this message can cut deeply, and it is okay if you don't want to listen to it. I also want to mention that this video is not about blaming anyone who has ever said it. It is about understanding the history and where this idea came from, why it sounded convincing in the past, and why modern endometriosis research and management guidelines now tell us a different story. By knowing the history, we can respond with facts and compassion instead of shame and confusion. Let me take you back in the memory lane. It is 1900s, and doctors were only beginning to recognize endometriosis as a distinct condition. Compared with today, they had very few tools, no modern laparoscopy, no ultrasound or MRI. There was also limited access to hormonal medicine. Some of the first reports came from a small groups of endometriosis sufferers who were followed over time. In the 1920s, to be specific, doctors such as Sampson and Meigs noticed that some endometriosis cysts seemed to shrink during pregnancy or even breastfeeding. They also noticed that women with more children seemed to have fewer endometriosis lesions than women with no children. From these small observations, a story began to form. For most of the individuals who had endometriosis that were followed, their symptoms appeared to sync with their menstrual cycle, and most importantly during the time that they are bleeding in a month. And since pregnancy stops period, the logical reason was that less bleeding appeared to mean fewer symptoms, and therefore pregnancy must be good for endometriosis. Let's walk through a scenario. Imagine being a young woman in the 1920s with severe pelvic pain and few options except major surgery. If your doctor saw another patient whose pain eased during pregnancy, then looked at you and said, if you have a baby, this might get better. It might have sounded like hope in a world with very little pain relief options. Thus, the concept of get pregnant to ease your period pain or cure your endometriosis morphed into a natural prescription for the disease. Between 1920 and 1940s, those early stories hardened into pure medical recommendations. Research that has reviewed historical evidence notes that by the mid-20th century, pregnancy was widely promoted as a prophylactic and curative measure for endometriosis. Some influential doctors argued that early marriage and frequent childbearing were the best ways to prevent or manage the disease. During those times, hysterectomy and removal of ovaries were often the options for severe disease. Effective pain medicines and hormonal treatment were limited in the 1950s and 1960s. Doctors used high-dose progesterone and estrogen or early contraceptive pills to mimic the hormonal state of pregnancy. Some patients did report symptoms improvement, which further reinforced the belief that the pregnant hormone pattern was beneficial. Let's walk through an example. Think of a doctor in the 1950s. They know that removing a young woman's uterus and ovaries will stop her pain, but also end her fertility. They have seen a few patients feel better in pregnancy. Under this condition, suggesting have a baby now, it might help, could have felt to them like offering a third kind of option. It sounded less like a medical experiment and more like a life script. In addition to these early observations, culture and gender norms also amplified this myth. The idea that pregnancy could cure endometriosis did not grow in a vacuum. It sat on top of powerful cultural belief about women, pain, and motherhood. In that setting, the suggestion, get married and have children, your pain will improve, fit neatly into existing expectations. These social norms that expect women to just be mothers still exist and visible today. Research on endometriosis show many patients describe feeling dismissed, disbelieved, or medically gaslit. To put in perspective, the pregnancy cure idea was reinforced by few treatment options that existed at the time and a culture that linked the woman's health closely to her role as a mother. This is how it worked. A woman in the 1960s goes to her doctor with disabling period pain. She's told, once you settle down and have a family, this will sort itself out. At home, her relatives may say, motherhood will make you stronger. The message is the same in medicine and in her social world. With no support groups, there is no alternative story to compare her personal experiences. If the pain comes back after pregnancy, she's also told to consider how worse it could have been if she hadn't gotten pregnant in the first place. And so she adopts the mantra and passes it down the generation. One could simply notice that the factors that led to the emergence of this myth and those that reinforce its adoption and transmission down the generation were rooted in societal life passage. And this is due in part to why these myths still exist even in the face of modern medicine. Currently, however, as research methods improve, scientists have begun to test whether pregnancy truly changed endometriosis in the long term. A major review titled The Effect of Pregnancy in Endometriosis, Facts or Fiction, concluded that evidence was limited and mixed. Improvements seen in pregnancy were not consistent across studies, and data on long-term outcomes is very, very limited. More recently, a qualitative study called Endometriosis and Pregnancy, The Illusion of Recovery, followed women with deep infiltrating endometriosis and became pregnant through in vitro fertilization. They found that most women had less pain during pregnancy and for a while after birth. Many of these women who had less pain during pregnancy began to hope or were told they were finally cured. Over time, however, symptoms gradually returned back for most of these participants. When pain returned, women spoke of feeling disappointed, misled, guilty for not going back on hormonal treatment sooner. Yes, some people feel better during pregnancy, but there are no reliable evidence that suggests that pregnancy cures endometriosis in the long term. National and international guidelines explicitly describe pregnancy as curing endometriosis as a myth. So, we now have a very different picture from the early 1900s. So imagine someone who has finally gotten pregnant after years of trying. Her pain settles during pregnancy. Her doctor says, see, it's curing your endometriosis. For about a year after birth, she feels almost normal and began to plan life as if the disease is over. Then the pain returns. Instead of feeling sad about the return of the symptoms, she also feels like she somehow failed at being cured, when in reality, the promise was never evidence-based. At this point, if you are asking yourself why pregnancy cures endometriosis still exists online, shows up in clinic, and then in family conversations, even in the face of solid review and current guidelines stating it's a myth, you are right, and several factors seem to point to this. One of such factors is real short-term improvement. During pregnancy, many people genuinely feel better, and both patients and clinicians remember those stories. It is easy to generalize from those experiences, especially if long-term follow-up is less visible. Secondly, it is an old concept that has been passed down the generation, informally. Advice shaped in the mid-20th century can linger in teaching, mentoring, and even in casual comments. Having children is still often seen as a milestone that everyone should want. This can make pregnancy sound like a natural solution even when it is not medically appropriate. 4. Medical dismissal and time pressure. Studies of endometriosis show that many patients feel dismissed or medically gaslit, their pain minimized or attributed to stress. In short appointments, Suggesting pregnancy may feel to some like a quick, familiar answer, even if it is not supported by current evidence. 5. Lack of awareness of infertility and emotional impact. Research shows that up to half of women with infertility have endometriosis, and those with both endometriosis and infertility experience more depression and lower quality of life than those with infertility only. If someone is not aware of this burden, they may underestimate how painful a casual pregnancy suggestion can be. These forces keep the myth circulating even when science has moved on. This is how it can show up in the clinic. A young GP who wants to be helpful has limited training in endometriosis. She has seen a couple of patients feel better in pregnancy and vaguely recalls hearing that pregnancy can cure endometriosis during her days in medical school. In a rushed appointment, she says sometimes getting pregnant can improve things. She does not intend harm, but the advice rests on old ideas rather than current guidelines. If we look back over the history, it becomes clear that pregnancy cures endometriosis myth grew from smaller early observations that showed positive results, lack of better treatment options other than surgery that would lead to infertility or suggesting pregnancy, and strong cultural ideas about motherhood. Now, we have better studies, clearer guidelines, and more importantly, voices from people living with endometriosis. So, the message can shift from pregnancy will cure endometriosis to something more accurate and kinder, such as some people feel better during pregnancy, but the disease often comes back afterwards. Pregnancy is not considered a treatment. Or, if you want children, let's make a plan that looks after both your fertility and your pain. If you don't want children or can't have them, you still deserve every option available to manage your symptoms and protect your quality of life from endometriosis. Always remember, your body is not a failed treatment if you do not become pregnant. Your endometriosis is not your fault if symptoms return after birth. And your worth and your right to care should not depend on your choice to or not become a parent. In our next episode, we will discuss the science behind why some people get relief during pregnancy and even a few years postpartum. Thank you for spending time with Endometriosis Voices. If you feel safe to share, you're welcome to add a comment about the messages you heard around pregnancy and endometriosis, whether they helped, harmed, or confused you. By understanding how the myth started and why it persists, we can be part of ending it and replacing it with care that is honest, compassionate, and centered on your needs. Share the page and its content with anyone you think can benefit from its resources. Endometriosis Voices, listening to lived experiences, learning from science.